Hi, this is Mrs. Often, and just looking today at the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. These are two things that you will use with conditional statements, and we will use them during proofs. We'll walk through some examples in geometry and in other mathematics. So let's get started. The law of detachment is a law of logic that states that if a conditional statement and its hypothesis are both true, then its conclusion is also true. So if this conditional statement, if P then Q, is true, and if P, the hypothesis, is true, then Q, the conclusion, must also be true. Let's look at an example. If I have a statement that I know to be true, such as if it is day one, then C block is the second block, and I also know that the hypothesis P is true, then that conclusion is also true. So if I know that it is day one, that is P is true, then C block must be the second block because Q is true. So both of those things, if P then Q and P, have to be true for me to assume that Q is true. Some examples from geometry. If two angles are congruent, then the measures of the two angles are equal to each other. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 1. What can you logically conclude about the measures of the angles? So we see that if two angles are congruent, then the measures of the two angles are equal. That's our P, bad looking P, and our Q. And we're given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So we're given that P is true. So we can conclude that the measures of the two angles are congruent to each other. The measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 2. And in proof, we would say that this is by the definition of congruent angles. Up next, if all four sides of a quadrilateral are of equal length, then its diagonals intersect at right angles. So which of the following figures can you use with the conditional to apply the law of detachment to draw the conclusion that its diagonals intersect at right angles? So we look at our if P, then Q, and we say, well, I'm looking for all four sides of a quadrilateral are of equal length. So as I look around, I see A, four sides at equal length, and E, four sides at equal length. Therefore, given that A and E are both quadrilaterals with congruent sides, four congruent sides, that means that the diagonals of A intersect at right angles and the diagonals of E intersect at right angles. Right, let's go on to the law of syllogism. And I want to go back here. Okay, so our next topic is the law of syllogism. The law of syllogism is the law of logic that given two true conditionals, with the conclusion of the first being the hypothesis of the second, there is a third true conditional. This is something that I associate with the transitive property, but it is not exactly the same. So if I am given if P then Q, and if Q then R, and that both of those are true, then I can know that if P then R is also true. For example, or something to note is that both conditionals must be true, and the conclusion of one must be the hypothesis of the other. So if you have a statement like, if a number is divisible by 5, then it ends in 5 or 0, And another conditional that we know to be true, if a number is even, then it is divisible by 2. We can't use the law of syllogism there because I don't have a case where the conclusion of the first is the hypothesis of the second. So you do want to be careful. We can't just squish any two conditional statements into a single conditional statement. But here are some examples we can use. If odd numbers are added together, they should say if two odd numbers are added together, then their sum is even. If a number is even, then it is divisible by 2. So that's going to change into if two odd numbers are added together, then the result is divisible by 2. If two angles share a common side and vertex, but no interior points, and their measures sum to 180 degrees, then they are adjacent supplementary angles. If two angles are adjacent supplementary angles, then they are a linear pair. Well, that tells us we can condense this. If two angles share a common side and vertex, but no interior points, and their measures sum to 180, then they are a linear pair. So that's a quick introduction to the law of detachment and the law of syllogism.